Last week, 1 in 3 people waited more than the 4-hour standard in A&E. There is a continuing crisis in Scotland's accident and emergency departments, a crisis caused by decisions made by this government over the past 15 years. Patients are waiting longer for care than ever before, and we know long waits cost lives. So can the First Minister tell the Chamber how many people waited over 24 hours in A&E in the last year?
First Minister.
Firstly, can I associate myself with Anna Sarwar's comments about Holocaust Memorial Day? This week, of course, we do remember all of the victims of genocide. That is important, but it is also important on this occasion to rededicate ourselves to the fight against prejudice, hatred and intolerance. And I know we are all united in that endeavour. In terms of the specific figure that Anna Sarwar has asked for, I suspect he is about to give it to me, but if he doesn't, I will provide it to him later. The situation in our accident and emergency departments remains very acute. There is significant pressure on the NHS generally and on emergency care in particular. However, we are at this stage seeing an improving situation. Since the start of January, for example, waits over both 8 and 12 hours have fallen by around 40% in each. So there is work still to do. We are supporting the NHS in that work, but we are hopeful that we are seeing the severity of the winter crisis start to abate and that we will see further improvements over the week to come.
Anna Sarwar.
The First Minister is right. I do know the number, and she should know the number too, because it impacts on people across this country every single day. The answer the First Minister was looking for is 6,362 people waited more than 24 hours in A&E last year. In 2019, that number was 48. Let me repeat that. 48 people waited more than 24 hours in 2019. In 2022, that number increased to 6,362, and some waited even longer. 1,356 people waited more than 36 hours in A&E, and 390 people waited more than 48 hours. That's 2 whole days waiting in A&E. This is the worst it has ever been. Staff are burnt out, patients' lives are at risk, and A&E doctors are telling us that 36 people could die due to long waits this week alone. So what is the First Minister doing right now to prevent these unnecessary deaths this week, next week and in future weeks too?
First Minister.
Well, I've set out in recent weeks the actions we are taking, the investment in the winter plan, investment in additional interim care beds, for example, and other support for the National Health Service. Long waits, whether in accident emergency units or in any other part of the NHS, are unacceptable, and they do have consequences, which is why we work so hard to reduce and eliminate long waits in the NHS. Of course, there is always something missing from Anna Sarwar's questions, important though these questions are, when he compares figures from 2018 to now, and that, of course, is a global pandemic that we have been dealing with in the intervening period. That said, it remains the priority to tackle waits in our National Health Service, which is why we are cautiously optimistic, although not complacent, about the improvements we are seeing in accident and emergency units. So the latest weekly figures, for example, show 4-hour performance up 6.7 points on the previous week. And as I've said, we are starting now to see significant declines in the percentages of people and indeed in the numbers of people waiting over both 8 hours and 12 hours. But there is still a lot of work to do to support staff. And of course, one of the things we have done here in Scotland, which has not been replicated in England or in Wales, of course, where there is a Labour government, is offer staff the best possible pay increase that we can, on average 7.5% here in Scotland, compared to 4.5% where Labour are in government in Wales.
Anna Sarwar.
Officer, listening to that response from the First Minister, I can understand the anger of staff and patients. This is what one nurse told the Daily Record this week. Patients are not angry at the NHS, but with the Scottish Government. The First Minister and the Cabinet Secretary need to speak to these patients. The Scottish Government do not see these patients as human beings, as someone's mum or someone's dad. This is about human life. Each and every single one of these SNP MSPs, constituents whose lives are at risk every single day. And it's not good enough for the First Minister to keep making excuses or to talk about COVID, because demand on A&E is actually down by nearly 120,000 people compared to 2019. Fewer people are using A&E, but waiting times are still longer than they've ever been. Scotland's NHS is at breaking point, and things are only getting worse on Nicola Sturgeon's watch. The longest ever waits at A&E. Patients waiting hours in ambulances to even get into A&E. 776,000 people, 1 in 7 Scots, on an NHS waiting list, and record-breaking delayed discharge. Our NHS, our patients and our staff deserve so much better than this. So why should people across Scotland continue to accept the unacceptable from this SNP government?
First Minister.
Firstly, Presiding Officer, every single patient seen on our National Health Service is a human being, and frankly I think it demeans Anna Sarwar's argument to suggest that any of us don't think that is the case. Well, Anna Sarwar is responsible for what he says in this chamber. Nobody else is responsible for what Anna Sarwar says in this chamber. Second point I would make, Anna Sarwar asked me in his previous question what action the government was taking. He then pointed to reduced demand for accident emergency services. That is actually because of the action that is being taken. The ambulance service see and treat, so that so many more patients now get seen and treated without ever having to go to a hospital. NHS 24, the work they are doing to reduce attendances at hospital or admissions to hospital. So that actually is an example of the actions we are taking having an impact. And then lastly, Presiding Officer, I take responsibility, as does the Health Secretary, for NHS Scotland every single day of the week. But Anna Sarwar's argument seems to be that this is all somehow uniquely down to the SNP. And I know he doesn't like comparisons, but if he's going to make that argument, then I'm afraid they are inevitable. If it's all down to the SNP, then why is it that in the latest full month that we have statistics for, A&E performance in Scotland is 6.2 percentage points better than it is in Wales, where Labour is in government? The fact of the matter is, pressure on the health service is intense. In Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland, we are dealing with that pressure, and in many respects, those who work so hard across our NHS in Scotland are doing a better job than we find in many other parts of the UK.
Question number 3, Maggie Chapman.